The 2022 California legislative session came to an end on midnight September 30th. The governor had a month to review over 1,000 bills, of which he vetoed a handful, but the rest became law. NTD's Daniel Hall spoke to a former New York State senator to hear more about how bills become laws in different states.
According to an analysis by the California Globe, Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed about 15% of the nearly 1,200 bills that made it to his desk this year. That means he signed just under 1,000 into law. Many of those bills were signed into law due to a rule in the state's constitution. While some states have a pocket veto law, vetoing any law that isn't signed by the deadline, California is the opposite. Any bill that isn't signed by September 30th at midnight automatically gets signed into law.
In some states, you have the ability to do a pocket veto, which would essentially mean that the governor takes no action, right? Doesn't do anything, and that's a pocket veto. But every state's a little bit different in terms of what the calendar session is and what time frame the governor has to sign the legislation.
David Carlucci is a political consultant and former New York State senator.
Depending on the state, they'll have a specific period of time in which they need to sign that legislation or veto it with a veto message, or if they take no action, it would be vetoed. Now, that could mean that maybe they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to put out a veto message. And it's a way to kind of do that without getting the sensationalism of it.
He said that these rules, like having a pocket veto or not, are all decided by the state's constitution.
Every state has a state constitution, and that's what's really important to look at, which some are very old, but basically it governs this process about how a law is made and the minutia that goes with it. So the terminology might be a little different, and the actions might be different as well.
State legislatures can also overturn governors' vetoes, just like Congress can overrule the president. But Carlucci said, due to modern politics being so hyper-partisan, it's unlikely to happen in most places.
Pretty much every state has the ability to override a veto, but in most cases, it'll be 2/3 of the majority of that legislative body. This is something to think about, is we are in a hyper-partisan environment, right? Where if you're a blue state, you're probably in the tank blue. You know, if you're red, you're like all the way red. So it's probably rare that you would even see that. Now, there are some cases, you know, you've got Kentucky and Wisconsin, where you have these legislatures that are Republican, but you have Democratic governors. Same in Kansas. So you would have a case where maybe it's more likely that you would see these veto overrides.
He added that many Western states have citizen-led initiatives and referendums, which Eastern states don't have.
You'll see that probably more common on the West Coast of the country, although it's not, you know, you still have it on the East Coast, is this citizens initiated referendum process, or a ballot initiative. So in California, which is very popular, are these ballot initiatives which are initiated by residents of the state, where you just go around, you collect a certain amount of signatures, and that issue is placed on the ballot.
As for the number of signatures and vetoes, Democratic authors made up the vast majority of both signed and vetoed bills in California this year. Of the bills signed, Democratic legislators authored about 80% of them, with Republicans authoring about 8%. But the same went for vetoed bills. Democratic authors made up about 85% of the vetoed bills, with around 10% authored by Republicans. Daniel Hall